Hello chess players, Mike Amori here. Welcome to another chess tutorial. I am showing you a position that I've used for many years for my tournament player students. And what I used to do for them is we would be in a classroom and we would pretend that this were a real tournament. So the kids would be playing with clocks, notation pads, etc. And if they had a question, they would have to raise their hand and pretend that they were in a real tournament room. So obviously they wouldn't be talking to each other, and we would play from this position. Half the kids would play white, half the kids would play black, and this is a pretty equal position, which means that if you play well, you'll have as many chances with black as you will with white. However, there are some differences in the position that make it interesting for both sides. So looking at this position, you'll notice that one of the main differences here is the shape of the pawns. That white has these doubled pawns here on the C file, here on C2 and C3, and black does not. They have all of their pawns on their original letters. Notice I didn't say original squares, because this pawn here on E5, that started up on E7, right? So it has moved, but it is still on the E file. So black has all of their pawns on the original letters, white does not. And the reason for that is earlier in the game, I can actually show you that. You see this bishop here on B4, they took the white knight, and white naturally took back. And that's why you have the shape that you're looking at now. What I'm going to do with this video is show you, one, the lecture or the lesson the students got before playing this position, and then show you how one of my students finished this position. Okay. You should be able to pause your video whenever I ask a question and you want some time to think. Other than that, feel free to watch this in maybe 2 different chunks. You can watch it in 10-minute segments, and this way you'll have some time to review what you've learned. Okay, watch this. If I take the same position that you're looking at and I take away some of the pieces and leave you with this, your eyes should focus on the fact that the pawns are on the same exact squares, and I just moved 1 rook for white. All right, the pawns are exactly the same, and the question would be, well, why would I move that rook? Well, that's where it was. And the reason I moved the rook was to make it stronger. The kids that played from this position were given the following advice. When you're playing a middle game in chess and you're not sure what to do with your rooks, then sometimes you can play an obvious move like put a rook on an open file. Okay? That's pretty clear. Once you've played enough chess, you realize that putting the rook on the open file helps you. But the question then becomes, well, what do I do if there are no open files? And that's what these kids learned before they played that game. So, in order to know what to do with your rooks when there are no open files, is you need to know what a pawn break is. Now, we're going to look at this from the white side, because my student Andrew played the position from the white side. So let's pretend we're playing the white side of this, and you say to yourself, okay, I want to put the rook on B1, but I think if I attack this pawn up here, that my opponent is just going to play pawn to B6, and my rook is really going to be shut out of the game. Now, if you know what a pawn break is, then you have another opportunity to bring your rooks to life. Now, in order to play a pawn break, you need to know what a pawn wedge is. Now, when I grew up, a wedge was a sandwich. You, however, will think of a pawn wedge as when two pawns are bumping heads, one from white, one from black. In English, you can say the pawn has been wedged up against the other. When there is a pawn wedge on the board, if you were to attack that wedge from the side, all of a sudden, you have an opportunity to open up roads. I'm going to waste a move for black. We're going to take black's pawn. I'm going to let black take back. And all of a sudden, you can see that the D file, what happened? It opened up. Awesome. You just created your own open file. However, there's something wrong with this break. In a real chess game, black is not going to just waste a move. If you play that pawn break now, black might say, hey, I notice that you let me take a free pawn from you. Can you see that? And if you take a pawn here, maybe they'll take another one here. And yes, the game is opening up. However, you might be down a pawn if you played this way as white. Do the math. Black has 6 pawns. White only has 5. So if you don't want to lose a pawn, then you might want to figure out a way not to. Okay, if you want to break, then you have to play the other break, and that would be f4. But you can't play f4. Why not? Well, there's a knight here. If you move the knight, let's say move it here, and black does something, I don't know, again, I'm going to make a random move just to show you what I'm talking about. Then all of a sudden, you can see the move f4. If black were to take you, you can take back with your rook. And again, I'm making another random move just to show the point. And then you can put the rook to this square, and now you have made what's known as a battery. You have doubled up your rooks, and that is really, really powerful. In a real game, black is not going to let you do these things for free. However, the concept is the same. Look at those two rooks, how powerful they are, and compare it to the move rook to b1. You see the difference? If you play rook to b1 and I stop your rook from taking me, you're not getting in so quick. All right? This is part 1. What I need you to understand before you pause your video is the following vocabulary. Open files, half open files, pawn wedges, and pawn breaks. Okay? Let's go here. This is an open file because there are no pawns on it. This is a half open file because one team has a pawn on it. If I were to turn the board around and let you see this from the black side, again, we have an open file on the E line, and for black, the C line is half open because there's only one white pawn on it. Don't worry about the knight. This can always move. But in terms of files, when there are no pawns on it, it's open. When there's one pawn on it, it's half open. And then what else did we learn? What is this called? That's called a pawn wedge. And what is it called when you attack the wedge from the side? A pawn break. Okay, part 1, done. You should know what an open file is, half open file, pawn wedge, pawn break. Okay, take a break. Excellent. Go watch a Met game. All my students know that to get an A in my class, you just need to show up with a t-shirt or a hat that says the Mets on it. All right, my friends, now watch this. I mentioned my student Andrew, who played the training position from here. This is the position I gave you from the start, right from here. And Andrew was playing a boy named Errol. These were both approaching high school at the time. I think maybe late middle school, 7th or 8th grade. Both really, really high-rated players for their age, and they got this position to train from. Andrew decided from here to play for a pawn break. Not here, not d4, because he didn't want to lose that pawn. So what he decided to do was he put his knight on h4. Can you see why? That opens the f pawn. That's why he played the knight to the side. When you first learn how to play chess, you were taught don't put knights on the side of the board because they can lose a lot of their power. That's true unless you have a very good reason to put a knight there. And he did, because he wants to play f4. Now, black had just moved their knight from c6 to e7. And the reason for that was the knight from this square didn't have much of a future. It couldn't really pop into these two squares, so it decided to come to the king side of the board. So Errol followed through with his plan. Andrew took the knight. He took back with the f pawn. And the reason he took with the f pawn was so that he could use this pawn to chase away that bishop. Now, Andrew wants to play the break. But he didn't do it now, because what he realized was he had something called an in-between move, a move that you play before you play the expected move. Now, what is his expected move? It's the move f4. But he threw in this check. He played bishop to c4 check first, and you're going to see later that this was an extremely important move to play, because when he played that move, he did two things. One, he improved his bishop. Now, this bishop on this square isn't really doing much, so by putting it on c4, the first thing he did was he improved his bishop. The second thing he did is he made the black king go to the corner, to a weaker square, because the only way to get out of check that makes sense is to move the king. And you'll see that when the king moved away, that the king is no longer protecting that rook. All right, that doesn't seem like a big deal now, but keep your eyes open. Well, let's go back. Moving the king is not the only way to get out of check. You certainly don't want to block with your knight, because you'll lose your queen. See, you can't move the knight. It's pinned. Well, what else can you do? If you push the pawn, we just take it. Again, you don't want to take the bishop with the knight. You'll lose your queen. And you'll see that all of the other options are not great. You put the bishop on e6, you lose it. Thank you for the free gift. And if you put the rook on f7, we know that rooks are usually stronger than bishops. You're giving me a chance to pick up some more points for free. So Errol just said, okay, no big deal. I'll move my king. All right, pause your video. Did you come up with the idea that pawn f4 was the way to continue? Yes, it was. There's the pawn break. Why? Because he's trying to activate his rook. Errol is not just going to sit there and say, okay, I'll let you open up the files and make your rooks really strong. I'm going to give you a problem to solve. So he attacked his bishop. Well, now, my friends, you have a problem to solve. What do you do with your bishop? Should you take the pawn? Do you back up and keep the pin? Or do you take the knight? I don't think you want to take the pawn, right? I think you're giving away points for nothing there. So now you have a problem. Do you keep the pin or do you take the knight? So you can make your own decision, but Andrew decided to take. And Errol now has 3 ways to take back. And he made a mistake here. If he would have taken with the pawn or the rook, he would have been okay. But unfortunately, he took the worst way, which was with the queen. Now, his thinking was good. His thinking was, let me introduce a new piece into the game. I'll get my most powerful player out. But the problem was, he put his queen and rook on the same line. So Andrew takes the pawn. You really cannot take the pawn with the queen because you lose a whole rook for nothing, and that's really, really bad. So what do? You just lost the pawn. So Errol's thinking was, not a problem. I'll take your rook check. You're white, so you're obviously going to take the black queen. I'll take the queen. And now as white, you have a decision. Should you take with your king or with the rook in the corner? So pause your video if you need time to think which is better. Okay, clearly, my dear friends, taking the rook with your rook is the best option. Because remember, the whole purpose of this lecture was to talk about the pawn breaks and opening up lines for your rooks. And that's exactly what Andrew did. Now it's Errol's turn, and what Errol should do is admit that he made a mistake, get this bishop out, even if it means losing a pawn, right? Even if it means losing a pawn, because do the math. You can see that black has 6 pawns and white has 7. So yeah, white has an advantage. Their pawn structure is better, their rook is better, but at least they're still in the game. And what's important about this position is if I turn the board around, like so, you'll see that the black rook in the corner is guarding these very important squares on the back row. Those are called ranks. So, watch this. The problem for Errol was here, he decided to not get his bishop into the game. And he said, I'll just take the pawn, and that leaves me with the same number of pawns as you. You have 7, I have 7, except for one problem. Because this rook is not in the game, he got checked. And this is going to turn out really, really badly because there's only one way to get out of check. And now can you spot the next check? Beautiful. The king comes up, and now wherever you move this bishop, the black king will be in check with the rook again. That's called a discovered check. Another term that I will put in the notes to this game. So if you move the bishop all the way back to b3, the king is in check with the rook. The only place you really don't want to put this bishop is here. Now, it is check with the rook, but the problem is the king will simply take. And that's bad. So what happened in the game was Andrew played bishop to e6. Don't forget, the king is in check. When the king moved out of check, he realized he's going to win that bishop. So he took it with the rook. The rook has to take, otherwise you're going to lose this for nothing. And from here, this is a completely winning position for white. Now, I'm not going to show you everything that happened from here because I want to jump ahead a little bit. And I just want to jump ahead to this position. Now, remember that Andrew had an extra bishop. And what happened from here is he used it beautifully. The pawn pushed up, black pushed down, he took, and the pawn pushed. Now, this is where I want you to stop your video one more time. If this pawn ends up coming here, it's going to become a queen, and that would be a problem. So can you figure out how Andrew stopped that? Yeah, he simply just pushed his pawn so that his bishop is covering that square. The pawn took, the pawn took, the king bothered the bishop, Andrew blocked the pawn, and from there, you see those two squares are covered, so the king can't get in to stop. Pawn g6, and then b5. And after that move, Errol decided to resign because he realized his king is not going to stop these pawns. Okay? Remember, the main focus of this lecture was to learn how to play the pawn break and get your rooks in the game when there are no open files. Okay, my friends, I hope you enjoyed it and you're learning something about chess. See you soon.